Hello, Garland Nixon here with Ray McGovern. A lot of things to talk about. We got Sergei Shoigu in North Korea. We've got all kind of strange things happening with Biden Gate. Let's talk. Hello, hello. We've got Ray McGovern, and Ray McGovern is certainly a household name in alternative media, which alternative media is really growing. I think that's a fantastic thing. And Ray, of course, was with the CIA for many years, delivered information at the highest level. He worked. A big part of his expertise was, in fact, the relationship between Russia and China, and so we're going to start there. Ray, привет, как дела? Let's start here. And I think this is interesting. First, I'm reading that the Russians and the Chinese are going to again be doing their naval drills and naval working together in the Sea of Japan in the Pacific region. Just a few weeks ago, Russia did a major exercise with their Pacific fleet. Full Pacific fleet. They're flexing their muscle in the Pacific. They're reminding people that they have a Pacific fleet, and an adequate one at that. But something different happened. Sergei Shoigu, the defense minister for Russia, showed up in North Korea shortly after a United States nuclear submarine showed up in North Korea. What say you? What do you make of all of this, Ray McGovern?
The thing that Henry Kissinger and Zbig Brzezinski and George Kennan and just about everybody and his brother and sister warned about was a two-front war where China and Russia would be together. In other words, where it be 2 against 1. Now, North Korea has been an outlier here, but now they're back in the club. Not only the defense minister from Russia, but very high-level Chinese people were there to celebrate, ostensibly, and really, the 70th anniversary of the armistice that ended the Korean War. If there ever was a more misbegotten war, it was that. Anyhow, here we have Shoigu going to Pyongyang. I just watched maybe 20 minutes of a 2-hour pageantry that was put on before Shoigu. It's quite amazing. It was on Chinese TV, and it was scary in a way. It beat anything I used to remember from the Red Square pageantry on Victory Day or on November 7th or 6th. It used to be the anniversary of the revolution. So the military display was really the cornerstone here. Of course, Shoigu is defense minister, for God's sake. And that's a nuclear sub. That was a sub with nuclear weaponry on it, not just a nuclear-powered sub. That was the first time we did that into South Korea, if memory serves. So this is sort of a warning. We're real close to, and actually, we North Koreans can reach you, United States citizens, with our new ICBMs. Now, here's a little promo for something that's going to come out pretty soon. I happen to know about. There's some thought that North Korea has been helped considerably by the Russians in developing their ICBMs. Now, this is not stealing technology or anything. This is rockets, actually not only modeled on Russian rockets, but pretty much identical to them. So we're looking into that. and we're not sure when that may have begun. But now you have not only Russia, China, you got North Korea. If U.S. officials have any sense about them, they would worry about this. I mean, North Korea is not as stable as China or Russia. I wouldn't. I'd be afraid of this fellow. And watching that martial display of his instruments scares me deeply. So, what's the whole thing about? Well, the whole thing is to say, "Hey, Jake Sullivan, wake up! Tony Blinken, look at this! Look what we got here! You say we're isolated." We got China. Well, people in China have a lot of military capability. And not only that, we have this very kind of volatile guy, Kim Jong-un, up here in Korea. So watch out. You don't really want a two-front war, do you? If you go overboard in the West, in other words, if you get involved in a dangerous way against our friends Russia, you can expect not only sable rattling out here in the Pacific, but maybe more than that. Maybe buzzing so close it'll be inches and that kind of thing. And worse still, if it comes to, as it's not likely to come, if it comes to a Russian defeat in Ukraine, we can't abide that. We're going to move. We're allied now. That is China and Russia. One last thought on this. When I started watching Sino-Soviet relations back in the early 60s, that was not the 1860s, but the 1960s, the trade volume was $200 million a year. Now, this year, was it? It's 200 billion with a B, okay? Now, if my math is right, that's 1,000 times what it was back in the 60s. If that doesn't speak to people, if that doesn't show how close this alliance is, how extraordinary and how with no limits this alliance is, then nothing will. So that's the warning. And this is, of course, the major thing we should be worried about, this alliance between China and Russia. Chinese analysts, of course, are prone to tell me, look, Ray, for God's sake, the Chinese aren't going to do anything unless it's threatening them specifically, right? And then I say, right, the Chinese know that they are the number one enemy, and this Russian thing is just a diversion. Once they get rid of the Russians, they're going to come after us, right? So it's pretty clear that China is joined at the hip with Russia. And this North Korean thing is meant to show, look, we not only have China, but we have this very volatile guy, which we are helping with his defense production, and which they're helping us to with the kind of shells and the kind of minor ammunition that you guys in the West are running out of.
Let me read something that came out very, very recently. Russia is ready for confrontation with NATO. Moscow does not want a conflict with the Western-led bloc, but is ready for any outcome. This is in RT. No one wants that, the president added, pointing to the existing conflict prevention lines that allow Russia and U.S. officers to talk directly about any crisis situation. The fact that these lines still work shows that no side is interested in a conflict. He added, if someone wants it, and that's not us, then we are ready. Now, that was in response, and this is another area I want to get your thoughts on. That was in response to recent dust-ups in the Middle East, in Syria. That's a spot we have to look very closely at. Russia is there. They are invited by the sovereign government. They've got a lot of, Iran is there, Syria is there, and the United States is illegally there. And all of those entities want the U.S. gone. And it seems to me that there's been, Russian dust-ups with unmanned drones, and the U.S. is pushing back. That's a very dangerous hotspot also, and things could flare up there. Your thought on what's going on in Syria and the Middle East overall?
Garland, I think you neglected to say who the speaker of those lines were. That was Vladimir Putin, correct? And was that today?
I'm looking right now, RT. It doesn't say that it's today,
Yeah, it would be today. I'm
but
just
I would
wondering
think
whether
so
we.
because they're
Yeah,
usually pretty quick on top of this stuff.
yeah, it was today. The reason I ask is because I would wonder if he said it 2 days in a row. Yeah, the Syrian thing is, tailor made for conflict, for confrontation. There are exchanges, military exchanges, sort of red line military contacts in Syria still, with respect to Syria, that are aimed at deconflicting any really serious clashes. And if memory serves, Putin actually referred to those, saying, well, at least we have these, but still, watch out because things are getting really hot and heavy here. And of course, Putin looking at this and seeing a U.S. president in a doubtful state of compos mentis, would have to worry about whether the newly appointed number two in the State Department, Victoria Nuland, who is certifiably a Russophobe and a very dangerous one at that. As a matter of fact, she's largely responsible for this whole Ukraine thing, and we can rehearse that if you like. But she's number two now. Suppose one of these flyboys out there in the Middle East gets the nod from number two in the State Department, and his officer says, "Yeah, go ahead, see what happens." Putin has to be prepared for that, and it looks like they're ready to play a dangerous game there in Syria. The more so since most of the world know, as you already pointed out, that they are there by invitation from Bashar al-Assad, the president of Syria. We are there at the invitation of no one. We have some 1,500, well, I guess it's 3,000 boots on the ground, 15, yeah, do my math, yeah, 1,500 guys, 300 boots. But what they're doing up there was described by Donald Trump as, oh, we're grabbing a oil. That's what we're doing. We're taking a oil. And indeed, that's what we're there. That's what they're doing. So that's not going to last very long. The Turks are involved there. They don't like the people that we are supporting on the Kurdish thing. And I would say that even though the U.S. seems to want to stay there forever, the handwriting's on the wall. And the more these clashes appear, the more likely it is that somebody sane, I don't know who that would be, but let's assume that somebody sane in Washington says, let's get those troops out of there. They're vulnerable. We better extract them while we still can and not have a Kabul airport incident.
You mentioned, let's put a couple of things together. You mentioned Victoria Nuland and the current dangerous policies that we're getting. We've got to wonder, having seen Joe Biden numerous times, particularly recently, struggling to really kind of understand what's going on around him, falling asleep, mumbling, stumbling, getting lost. I mean, it looks pretty bad. This guy's having some problems. And we see a couple weeks ago, Elliot Abrams, of all brutal and genocidal ghouls, followed up by Victoria Nuland. I think I ask myself, is Joe Biden making these decisions? He seems like he's having problems. Your thoughts on, let's just say, the state of Joe Biden and the state of the Biden administration as a result of the state of Joe Biden?
Well, Garland, the important thing is what Putin sees from his perch in the Kremlin. I asked earlier today a psychiatrist friend of mine, a really sharp guy. I said, assuming that the Kremlin has the same kind of unit that we had in the CIA, they called it at a distance psychological profiles. Okay, so for example, you want to do a psychological profile on Putin? Well, you have to be at a distance, right? But you go through all the steps and you write up a report. This was what makes him tick, and this is what he might likely do now. I said, what's Putin getting from his psychological at a distance psychologist now on Biden? And the answer was really strange. He said, Ray, I think Putin knows, as I do, the psychiatrist, that Biden's not going to do anything that they don't tell him to do. So if I were guiding Putin, I would say, look, it's the Blinkens, the Jacob Sullivans, the Victoria Nulands, the Abrams. My God, those are the ones that are going to tell him what to do. Or if he has something else in mind that they don't like, they'll tell him not to do. Now, okay, I think probably my psychiatrist friend is correct. So where does that leave Putin? My God, with each new crazy neocon, thinking of Abrams, for example, that's appointed, which each promotion for existing neocons, Victoria Nuland now number 2 at state, I mean, he's got to worry a lot, okay? And he's got to say to his military, look, I can't assure you that these people are capable of making reasonable decisions. They say in Ukraine that they're going to be there for as long as it takes. I don't know whether they'll make that good or not, but if they're going to do that, they're going to have to choose between putting boots on the ground or going to the weaponry that everyone fears. It's questionable whether these neocons fear it, tactical nuclear weapons. So not only be on alert, but realize, my military, says Putin, that I appreciate your dilemma. You keep telling me we don't go about analyzing intentions. We look at capabilities. My God, look what they can do. So we're ready to zap them. I said, well, look, don't zap them until I tell you to do. And let's just hope we can ride this thing out. Now, I just append to all these remarks the notion that the big question in my mind is once the counter-offensive by Ukraine peters out completely, and I imagine that's about 2 or 3 weeks away, where they've committed all their reserve troops and everything else, what's Putin going to do then? That will be in the middle of August. That will be a month or so, maybe 2 months before the mud sinks in. He'll have free rein to go all the way to the Dnieper River. Will he do that? I have been thinking, yeah, he probably will, okay? But I don't know now because there are these rumors, a lot of them, and some of them come from pretty good sources, that he's going to opt for mobilizing 500,000 more troops. And that suggests to me, if those rumors have any strength, that he's going to play the typical Putin game, attrition. The military in this country uses the word attrit. We're going to attrit them. We're going to attrit them. Well, they're attriting a whole bunch of Ukrainians at this point. So are they afraid of Abrams tanks? I don't think so. It looks like they do a pretty good job on tanks. Witness the videos today, which show one Russian tank taking out a column of Ukrainian tanks. I mean, it's really bad. So they're not afraid of Abrams tanks. Are they afraid of F-16s? Well, even Milley says, well, F-16s, the Russians have a lot more and a lot better, and we have to prepare thousands of them and hundreds of them at least, and then we have to train and have to equip. So F-16s are not going to be in the picture until about this time next year, if then. So what have the Russians to fear? I don't know. It's anybody's guess. But my guess is that Putin will say, well, look, guys, take it easy. Take it easy. We're winning here. We're attriting the hell out of them. We're going to keep to plan A, okay? And maybe, just maybe, Biden will decide that early next year or late this year, it's better to cut his losses rather than to have to cut his losses in the middle of a campaign to be reelected. So let's see what happens. Just hold tight. Meanwhile, yeah, mobilize. But it would surprise me if Putin diverted from plan A into something more spectacular. He doesn't need to. And of course, his primary objective always has been to avoid U.S. boots on the ground and only slightly less Polish boots on the ground. And that's not a Polish joke.
Right. And one of the things I like to do, Ray, is I like to go to TASS. I like to go to Global Times. I like to see what's the number one story there. I learned that from you. You know, you said, hey, listen to what the Russians say, listen to what the Chinese say, read what. So I go to RT, that story's there. I go to TASS. Here's the story. Russia does not want a military clash with U.S. Putin. We are always ready for scenario, but no one wants this. So this is the same thing. We're always ready for any scenario, but no one wants this. And on the initiative of the American side, we once created a special mechanism to prevent these conflicts, right? So we're looking at, you know, to me, when I read that, you know, learning from Ray McGovern that says, read what they're saying all over Russia. There's red lights flashing, you know, there's like on the dashboard, the lights are flashing red. We don't want a conflict. We don't want a conflict. We don't want to clash with the U.S. And meanwhile, there's discussion. We're hearing it. I'm hearing it. You're hearing it about a possible mobilization of a 500,000 or possibly more people. It sounds to me like they have concern. Particularly, I really believe right now, Ray, two things that are giving them that concern, because these are the things that they're giving me the concern. One that we've discussed, and that is Syria. The other is the Black Sea. The grain deal went south. The Russians, and it's clear what happened. They said, you're using this thing for weapons. It's not working. We're killing this. We're killing the grain deal. Interestingly, just before their Africa summit, another interesting thing. But the U.S. is saying, you know, as usual, the U.K. they're giving the old the Black Sea. We can do whatever we want to, and we may have to put ships in the Black Sea. And the Russians are seeing Syria. They're hearing the Black Sea, and now they're saying we don't want to fight. But if there's a fight, we'll have to do it. And I have to also think that China, North Korea, all of that is Russia is seeing people get, as they used to say when we were young, people, the neocons are getting a little froggy, and the Russians are concerned. And when I see that at the top of task, we don't want to clash. That's like somebody saying to me, Garland, I don't want to fight. What they're saying is, but I will if I have to. And I have nobody's going to say, I don't want to fight you unless they're concerned that you're going to swing on them. Right.
Well, there's great concern on what could happen in the Black Sea. You know, Zelensky would love to have some sort of provocation, some kind of false flag provocation, for example, that he could exploit to get NATO even more deeply involved. I would exclude, well, it's just a layman's perspective here. If you're winning, you don't need this kind of incident, okay? If you're winning, you're able to say, look, we made a deal on this grain deal. You were supposed to do 1, 2, and 3. You didn't do it. We lengthened the deal a couple of months twice, and you still didn't do it. Do it. You know, we want these exemptions from the sanctions. We want access to SWIFT and all that. You said you'd do it, and you didn't do it. Now do it, or else you can't do this anymore. So, and the Russians are within their rights here. I don't think they want real trouble, but you know about the Tonkin Gulf, right? Okay, now, Tonkin Gulf was used, for those of you of youthful age, was used to justify pretty much a declaration of war against North Vietnam. Who provoked the Tonkin Gulf episodes? We did. We had PT boats going into North Korean territorial waters and provoking them, find out where their radars were and all that stuff. And one of them almost got shot at, and the other one, the next day, nothing happened. But they used it. The U.S. used it to get Congress to authorize unlimited war against North Vietnam. So this kind of thing happens. And with Elliott Abrams, for God's sake, in whatever capacity they call it, in the White House, Victoria Nuland and Blinken and Jacob Sullivan. My God, how do we get these guys, these people in there? They're there. And so all I'm trying to say is that it makes no sense for Russia to raise the ante except to assert their rights on this grain deal. It does make a lot of sense for Zelensky to provoke the kind of incident that he thought might get the US and NATO involved. Now, one thing that most people haven't really dwelled on, remember when Zelensky about 4 weeks ago was saying, the Russians are going to blow up Zaporizhzhia, the biggest nuclear power plant in all of Europe. They're going to blow it up. We have indication, we have signs, they're going to blow it up. They're going to, and all that fallout and all that stuff will go all over the place in Europe. What are they going to do it? Huh? Well, it became so obvious that a false flag was prepared, that Ukraine was doing the false flag, and that they'd blame it on Russia, and they'd wait until the wind was blowing the right way, and it doesn't take much from Ukraine to hit Zaporizhzhia, okay? Now, people say, well, it's hardened. Well, it was hardened, but how about those big pools with that extra stuff in it, radioactive stuff? So what happened? Well, this all came to a head about a week before the Vilnius NATO summit, right? And all of a sudden, Zelensky stopped. Now, there were press reports that he did stop because he was advised, don't do it. Don't do it. Wait a second. I thought the Russians were going to do it. No, the NATO allies, about 5 of them, came to Zelensky and said, look, don't do the Russian attack on Zaporizhzhia, all right? We know about it. We're not going to get into the involvement. We don't want fallout going into Poland and Romania, okay? Don't do it. So Zelensky didn't do the Russian attack on Zaporizhzhia. Now, picture all that. A week later, NATO leaders convene in Vilnius in Lithuania. They know that this guy just tried to mousetrap them, right? They know that this guy, in order to widen the war, was willing to have radioactive fallout come into their own countries. They know there was only they that prevailed and said, no, don't do this. U.S., I don't think, did much. It was really interesting. U.S. didn't say diddly about this, okay? But the West, of course, the U.S. is out of range, right, of the fallout. So anyhow, here comes Zelensky, and they say, hi, hi, Volodymyr. And if my reasoning is correct, it's never going to be quite the same with Zelensky. Look, you tried something really, really bad. We know about it. You stopped, but still, this is really, really bad. And I think that put a real stinky odor to the relationship. That's why I think they kind of turned their backs on him in some ways, literally as well as figuratively. So what's the point of all this? The Allies know that Zelensky is not only a loose cannon, is going to do what he can to get us involved, but also he's willing to do really crazy things like blowing up nuclear power plants or their cooling pools, okay? And that only they can stop this. And if Zelensky's back is up against the wall, what the hell else might he do? So this all fits into the equation here. What are these guys in Washington going to do, crazy as they are, with Biden saying Russia has already lost the war, saying that 3 times within 2 minutes, reading from notes, Russia has already lost the war. And besides, Russia has already lost the war. That's literally the way it went, right? Now, he was told that by the head of the CIA, Bill Burns, who 4 days before had an op-ed in the Washington Post saying Russia has already lost the war. Russian military weakness has been exposed to the whole world. Okay, now that's counterfactual. Whether Burns knows that or not, he must be an idiot if he doesn't know that. So what are they going to do in a couple of weeks when the flag goes up? The Ukrainian counteroffensive is universally recognized as having been completely inept, and it's failed. What are they going to do then? And with the election coming up, all I could say in addition to all this is that Vladimir Putin has spoken in the past, about 5 years ago. He said, look, I happen to know from watching that U.S. foreign policy is determined by domestic political considerations and events. We had a ceasefire in Syria. What happened to that? 6 days later, boom, U.S. Air Force bombed fixed Syrian positions that had been there for half a year, okay? So even if I talk to Biden, there's no guarantee that they'll make good on these promises. So Russians are on edge. U.S. has to figure out what to do. The people doing that figuring out are the worst possible people you could have doing that job.
I certainly agree with that, Ray. Your thoughts on the Russia-Africa summit? I think that was very interesting. A number of things keep coming out. Let me give you one real quick. One quick one, Ray. 1 second here. There we go. Russia to help Nigeria resuscitate steel sector. That's just one of many things. I'm reading that Russia's saying we're going to deal with African states in their local currency. The other thing that I saw that I've been looking at some Tanzania Times. I mean, you go to some of the African their websites, their news site, English news sites, and you see that some of them are literally the president of Eritrea are literally saying that Vladimir Putin, you are leading the fight against imperialism. You are leading our fight. They see him as their military champion. It's really interesting what's happening. And what I see is this. The U.S., the world started last February 24th or whatever it is for the U.S. empire, for the U.S. neocons. For the Africans, they have a historical context. They remember what happened with the Soviet Union, the ANC. They still talk about the Cubans coming over in Angola. I talk to some of the Africans, and they have a very, very clear historical context when it comes to the Russians, and they see them through that lens. Your thoughts, Russia, Africa. And of course, China has to be a part of that conversation. But your thoughts on that Russia summit, what are you starting to pick up, Ray?
You're quite right. There is a history, and the history is colonialism by the French, by the Germans, by the British, by the Dutch. It's a very sad history. By the U.S., when you talk about slavery. And during the Cold War, the Russians reached out to these folks, supported the ANC, and blessed the Cuban revolutionaries that went down there to help repel some of these real righteous dictators. So that's the history that they can draw on. The other history, of course, is that they're economically very marginally involved at this point in Africa when compared to how the former imperialists are involved. There's still very extensive economic and trade contacts. So they're not, they're not winning from that edge yet. But when you talk about, who was it?
Hey, they got I'll say this, but they have a big brother who's very, very economically involved. And I think that's part of the equation too, right?
You mean China? Both of them, yeah.
Yes, so, Russia has a big brother, China, who's there.
It was Lumumba who was assassinated, right? Lumumba, yeah. I saw a photo of his son shaking hands with Putin. I mean, the symbolism there is amazing. Okay, we know who assassinated my father, says Lumumba's son. And Putin says, yeah, that's pretty terrible. We don't go around assassinating people like that. If we did it in the past, it's a new Russia. Okay. So what am I saying? I'm saying that it was really an interesting spectacle the way the Western press played it. Oh, there are 70 African nations and only what 17 showed up, 46, only, right? Now, Sergei Lavrov, the Russian foreign minister, commented on this one time when he was in Africa. And he said, I talked to a lot of African leaders, and I said, well, now you unwilling to come to Moscow to deal with us. Why is that? Why is it that if you do what the U.S. tells you, what do you expect then? And the answer was, now get this, Garland, the answer was, well, then we won't be punished. Then we won't be punished. Wow. So these people, especially the people in the General Assembly, they're finding they're getting a little freer, but it's going to take a while because none of them want to be punished by doing something that the U.S. tells them not to do. That'll take a little while to ease. China the same way. They're coming in. They're building roads and doing socially useful things. So it's if I'm an African, I'm going to be still careful, but I know what my future holds for me, and I don't want to have my people either colonized or assassinated.
I think you're right. Yeah, and I think that the Africans, to some extent, put on a show. I tell you something. I'm going to throw this at you, Ray. Very interesting. I don't know if you can make any sense of it. One of the things that I found most remarkable about the entire Russia-Africa summit is that Yevgeny Prigozhin was wandering around, shaking hands, skinning and grinning. And I thought, he was supposed to be, persona non grata. First, we were told he was in Belarus and never to come back, banished to the far land of Belarus, right? But we find out, he wasn't in Belarus. He was still in Russia. There are those. Now, I'm going to throw this out at you, Ray. There are those who said, that Prigozhin thing was some kind of a false flag. That was something fishy. Maybe it was a honeypot. Not that, Prigozhin's the most handsome guy in the world, but it was a honeypot where they were drawing, the traders in. So I don't know what's going on. What say you about this mysterious character Prigozhin, who we know, Wagner, I think got statues of in Africa of the Wagner. Wagner's well liked in a part of Africa. Interesting that Prigozhin is back on the scene shaking hands at the Africa summit. Yeah, Ray.
Well, I wish you hadn't thrown it at me. I thought we were friends, Garland. This is really hard to figure out, right? Now, the big thing to remember is that Prigozhin is one of the most popular people in Russia. Why? Because he's the hero of Bakhmut, okay? The Russian press was full of stories about Bakhmut and would the Wagner people be able to surmount the difficulties there? And they did at terrific cost. Hand-to-hand fighting in those apartment buildings and so forth. They finally liberated Bakhmut, and it was celebrated throughout Russia. And who was the hero? Prigozhin, okay? Now, what does that mean? To me, it means that Putin has got to be really careful of this guy. He's got a following, okay? And he's got a lot of people who listen to him when he says, we really should be a little bit more forward. We ought to take the gloves off and go after these guys in Ukraine, okay? A lot of people think that too. So what do you do? What do you do with Prigozhin if you're Putin? Well, if I read him right, he's being very, very delicate and very, very circumspect and saying, all right, Prigozhin, these African guys, we need some way to sort of semi-rehabilitate you. Yeah, come on, meet these guys, but don't wear fatigues and don't wear a fancy baker's uniform. Wear a white T-shirt, okay? And then you can talk to the kibbutz with them on the sidelines, and the press will see that. That's good. So Vladimir Putin is being nice to Prigozhin, even though he did this stupid thing. Prigozhin, after all, and his stalwart troops in Wagner captured Bakhmut, their heroes. Now, when he marched into Rostov-na-Donu, Rostov on the Don, right? The people welcomed him there. They were very. I mean, you see the pictures. Who was it? That very courageous photojournalist was there, and you see how the way those people were welcomed. And then you saw the tail end of the welcome when they were really vociferous. And when was that? That was when it was clear that they weren't going to go all the way up to Moscow, that a deal had been made. They were going home. They're still heroes, but they're not challenging Putin anymore. They're going home. So they're going to Donetsk and then to Belarus. And so more than that, I do not know. I confess, this is one of the real puzzles that occur infrequently. Really, usually can figure these things out, but that's the best I can do. Thanks for throwing it at me there, Garland. I thought you were my friend.
Yeah, that was a tough look. I don't think any of us can figure that one out. But I'll say this: if Prigozhin in this instance is an asset, when the Africans are there, why not use the asset? So, any port in a storm and all kinds of euphemisms like that. Look, if he's of a value and the Africans, and he knows some of those African leaders personally. So, hey, come here, shake hands, make friends, and go on about your business. So that's interesting. Poland, another issue. We've touched on Syria. There's just so many spots right now where things could go bad. We've touched on Syria. We've touched on the Black Sea. Poland, what happens? There is, and I like to go to the Kremlin website. So there's a meeting, and Naryshkin and Putin says, "All righty, who's got something to say?" The head of their intel, Naryshkin says, "Yeah, me, please, me." Putin says, "Go ahead." And Naryshkin says, we got some intel that the Poles are getting jumpy, that they want to jump with, add some of the other Lithuanians, whoever the hell. And they're thinking about moving into Western Ukraine. Now, it was reported broadly on alternative media that Putin said, if they come into Western Ukraine, I'm going to punch their daylights out. But when you read what Vladimir Putin said, he said, well, if the traders want to sell their land away to their masters, hey, it's none of my business. I don't care. But if they mess around with Belarus, now that's part of the Russian state. That's not going to be tolerated. So, and if we're good now, of course, Lukashenko went a little further. Lukashenko will throttle them about the face and neck if they come anywhere near us. But Putin was Western Ukraine. I don't care about ain't nothing over there anyway. But don't mess around with Belarus, or we're going to go to Knuckle Junction. Your thoughts on Poland? And of course, look, let's be honest. But they got 150,000 people. Poland does not have the military capacity on their own to go confront the Russian military. So anyway, I'll throw all that at you. Your thoughts, Ray?
Well, Garland, you're young enough to become an analyst at the CIA. I think you should apply immediately, because you put it all together. You even read what the Russians say. No, what you delineated there is exactly how I reacted to that. Really strong stuff. No question. But if Poland fools around with Belarus, the Russians are in full stop, right? The Russians consider Belarus part of a kind of a unity there, okay? Now, as Naryshkin prompted Putin to say, so what if the Poles go into the western part of Ukraine? Now, I really noticed the difference between what Putin said with respect to that, and I won't repeat what you just described. That's sort of like it was very different from, the Western Ukraine is no ally of ours. Let them, the history is such that these traders will sell off Ukraine to the highest bidder, in Poland and Lithuania have traditionally been that. And Putin has educated the Russian people to the history of all this. Lithuania, Poland, ruling vast parts of this part of the world, including Russia, way back 3 centuries ago. So I don't know how to read that, really. I mean, Poland is a member of NATO, okay? Now, can Poland go into Ukraine even if it's sort of asked by Zelensky, whoever takes his place, without NATO becoming strictly involved? I don't know the answer to that. But I do notice, as you have, that Putin left open that option in a sort of jocular kind of way. Say, well, Ukrainians can sell out to the Poles that they want. I just don't know how the Russians would react to that. I think it's more likely that the Russian forces will take Kharkiv pretty soon. They're on their way. And by the time they go farther west, it may become academic in terms of what the Poles think they can do. Again, it all depends on what Mr. Putin decides to do, whether it's a trit, or whether it's something more explosive. I would expect that decision will be made within 2 or 3 weeks at the most.
I think you're right. And I also think it came from Naryshkin. I think what we are hearing now is, and the Russians, it seems to me that they like to do this, if they get a sniff of something, they let you know. Where some people kind of hold it close to the vest, but if the Russians, you can correct me if I'm wrong. Some countries, if they hear, well, these people are starting to mess around on our border, they'll keep it quiet and watch it. To me, when I watch the Russians, they tend to be more likely, if they get some intel that you're thinking of doing something tricky, they'll tell you. They'll tell everybody, hey, over there in that area right there, I hear we get rumors, some smoke signals are going up that somebody may be thinking of doing something in that area over there. And if they do, this will be our response. This is how we view it. I mean, that's the way I see the Russians. They tend to be, they want you to know, we know what you're going to do. And if so, this is how we'll react, because they seem to be they're practical, but they're straight to the point. They're not trying to trick you. You know what I mean? They're saying, this is what we're going to do. We want you to know what we'll do. What do you think?
Well, right? I think, Garland, this is actually sui generis. It's different. The context here is of great importance. We're not talking about some minor reports about what the Georgians might do to the Russians or something. We're talking about the big fight. We're talking about many well-documented reports, not only with Naryshkin, but in the West as well. So I see this as a major thing. It was staged in a major way. The whole bunch of them convened around there, and Putin said, no, CIA director, which is what Naryshkin is, tell me, is there anything we should be worried about? And he boom, 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 boom. Yeah, the Poles might do this. And this is no Polish joke, okay? All right, this is real. Poles are crazy. They've done this before. Now, what also makes it sui generis is the history. And that's why Putin took the Russian people through the whole history of how things have changed, how parts of Germany as well as Ukraine were given to those countries by Stalin, for God's sake. The Germans did did hear that. So he took them through the whole. Maybe we have just 1 minute. I could tell you the Russians have a really strange and bad history. All right, they didn't really get started till the year 950 A.D. In the current liminal of the current era, if you will. Okay. And so they were far behind. Then they were invaded for 2 centuries and 40 years by the Genghis Khan folks. Okay. They finally get rid of them as the West is coming out of the Dark Ages into the Renaissance. And what happens? The Lithuanians and the Poles and the Hanseatic League descend on them and try to make sure that Russia can never be a united country. Ivan the Terrible, however terrible he was, he got them all together in the 16th century. And since that time, they've been fighting off the Poles and the Lithuanians and the Hanseatic League and all that kind of stuff. And so there's a long history that every Russian school child knows about this. And of course, you don't have to tell them about Napoleon or about Hitler either. So, adducing that history, it's not made up. It's real. It's the history of a country that's seen war, invaders. We aren't going to let it happen this time. And if the Poles try anything, well, remember what they tried last time. We're not going to abide by it. I think that's the real story this time.
And I think, to be frank, if I were, the Poles want to rearm and they want all these new weapons and they want to be this military center of Germany, of Europe. Tell me if I'm wrong. This is my inclination. If I was Germany, I'd be worried about that. If I was Germany, I'd be more concerned about the Poles turning those turrets around in the other direction and saying, we want a piece of that. We want to bite a part of it. If I was Germany, I would not be happy about the U.S. saying we're going to shift our focus from Western Europe over to such an unstable place as Poland. And Poland having too many weapons, when in fact, the Germans a couple months ago said, we're just about out of weapons. Our military is exhausted. And they said, at this point, we don't even know if we could defend our land. And I think the Poles were like, what did I hear? What did I hear that? You can't defend your Am I out in space saying, if I'm Germany, I'm looking at the Poles? And I'm always a little apprehensive that they maybe, have a negative attitude towards me. Right.
Yeah. Well, the feeling, of course, there is mutual. The German leaders don't know nothing. They're concerned with politics. They're concerned with keeping power. This terrible group from the right, the Alternative für Deutschland, the AfD, has got it's almost become the majority party, for God's sake. And it's going to be a cold winter this winter with very, very high fuel prices. But if I could be jocular for a second, what really bothers the Germans is the appointment of this new brigade in the Polish army named after Alexander Graham Kowalski. You know who he was, Garland?
I've heard the name once or twice, right?
Oh, yeah. He was Alexander Kowalski. Alexander Graham Kowalski was the first Polish telephone pole. First telephone pole. Sorry about that. Okay, you can delete that because it comes at the end of the thing. That was my attempt at a joke, Carl. Didn't go over well. Yeah.
Go ahead. Another thing, a few more minutes here. We'll go one more. Turkey. Erdogan is an interesting character here. He stabs everybody in the back. Made a deal we thought with Sweden was in, and now there's question what will happen with that. It's funny, when he made that deal, the latest deal with the U.S., and people were like, oh no, he's made a deal with the U.S. with Sweden. And I'm like, well, number one, he made a deal with the neocons. You can't trust them. Number two, the neocons made a deal with Erdogan. You can't trust him. So two untrustworthy parties making a deal. But Erdogan has his issues. He's got economic issues at home. He's got the issue of Syria that, he's got a lot of people who, he's got the Kurdish issue, and he's got the rapprochement between Persians and Arabs, and now people are saying, you need to get out of Syria. Your thoughts on Erdogan, Turkey? very interesting things going on with him, and he's in a tough spot. Not that he hasn't put himself in a tough spot, but he's in a tough spot, to be quite frank.
Well, he just won re-election, but his economy is imploding. Okay, that's his main consideration. So what does he do? He bargains. He bargains. Say, look, I'm not going to let Sweden in unless you get the IMF to help me with the money I need. Unless you promise to give me these F-16s, okay? And maybe then I'll say, okay, Sweden, you can get in. And that's exactly what happened. Cy Hirsch, I think, was the one that came up with the news that they got a very big economic buyout to help him. So, yeah, he's, I don't know if you call a guy like that untrustworthy. Most people would. I'd say he's a politician, a consummate politician. He'll bargain and he'll get something for nothing, really. What, given the Swedes the okay, they're going to really help NATO a lot, right? Okay. So he says, all right, but for that, I want this, this, and this. Now, that doesn't diminish the problem with the Kurds. You know, the Kurds that have been supported by the U.S. are not the Kurds that are supported by Erdogan. And the sooner the U.S. gets out of northern Syria, out of the oil fields there, out of the fertile agricultural land, the better. And I think Erdogan wants that, as well as Bashar al-Assad. And of course, for the first time in many years, I think they're talking to each other, those two.
Yeah, I think Erdogan, I had heard that the Saudis deposited some money just before the election, many billions of dollars in bank accounts to stabilize Turkey somewhat, that they took some actions prior to the elections to help Erdogan win because they had some deals. So there's a lot of players going on here. What I haven't heard is the Chinese with Turks yet, and that's the one I'm looking to hear. But at any rate, Ray, I've taken up enough of your time. I certainly thank you. Great evening, everyone. Go to Ray McGovern. What is it? RayMcGovern.com, right?
Yeah, or at Ray McGovern on Twitter.
At Ray McGovern on Twitter, RayMcGovern.com, and you can always find out what Ray's up to. I really enjoy our discussion. Thanks a lot, Ray, and I hope to talk to you again soon.
You're welcome, Garland. Take care.
All right. All right, that is Ray McGovern, and we are. There we go. That's Ray McGovern. Thanks a lot, everybody. Certainly appreciate that. We're going to take a few minutes here. God knows if I'm able to, I would like to look at the super chats and try to answer them because we always have great questions. But geez, there's a lot of people today, but we got a lot of great questions in the super chats. So let's try to get through them. All right, we're going to start with Sparky says, make Ukraine Russia again. Sparky again says, build a better world with BRICS. How about this? Sparky says, Sullivan, Newland, and Blinken are psychopaths who replace the usual sociopath who normally runs U.S. foreign policy. Yeah, we're in a dangerous time with those people because they're out of their freaking minds. Putin is an anti-globalist hero, says Sparky. Salty Giant, thank you very much, Salty Giant. How about we go with Sparky? Putin didn't ask for the world, but the West is giving it to him anyway. Yeah, they are really screwing things up. Along with Klaus Schwab, Elliot Abrams is right out of the villains category in Central Casting, says Sparky. Yeah, he's a villainous kind of dude. You will never find a larger hive of scum and villainy than you will in the Biden administration. Let's see. Sparky again says U.S. diplomats aren't diplomatic. Good point. U.S. doesn't do diplomacy. Oh, anyone else? And nobody says, thank you, Garland and Ray McGovern, for your courageous service to your country and humanity and for not having commercials. So thanks a lot. All right, let's look over on Rockfin. Nope, nothing over there. So, all right. Well, thanks a lot, everybody. Certainly appreciate it. You all keep in mind, if there's anything you can do to help the channel, we got patreon.com PayPal. Buy me a coffee is always great. A lot of people do that. It's very simple. Go in there and it says, buy Garland a coffee, 5 beans. And how many coffees do you want? It's easy. And it does like Patreon now. You can do it a monthly subscription on Buy Me a Coffee. So that's great. Certainly, my Cash App info there. And last but not least, rockfin.com/Garland Nixon. Please become a Rockfin member. It costs nothing. And if I get 3 strikes and they throw me off of YouTube, you can go to Rockfin, no advertisements over there, and you can find me there, and it's uncensored. So please, that's my alternative platform is Rockfin. Go to rockfin.com/Garland Nixon and become a member. No charge. Rockfin, if you can afford it. Rockfin does allow people to be subscribers. So please, if you can afford to subscribe to my channel on Rockfin, it would be highly appreciated to support the channel. It is $14.99 a month or like $12.40 a month if you sign up for a year, because they give you 2 free months. But as I said, if you can't afford it, that's fine too. Just become a member. Share all of my stuff on all of your platforms, all your social media, et cetera, et cetera. Thanks a lot, everybody. Have a wonderful evening. Thanks for Brother Ray McGovern. Don't forget RayMcGovern.com, @RayMcGovern on Twitter. Peace. I'm out. Make sure. Oh, by the way, I forgot. Thanks a lot. Vita in DC. Thank you very much. Hit the like button. Hit this, as Alex Christoforou says it, smash that like button. Don't break your computer. Don't hurt your computer, but please smash the old like button. Share this on all your social media platforms. Thanks to you very much. Chicken Patty, Valley S, Kinky 2. Peace. I'm out.